Me, I want what's coming to me.
Oh, well, what's coming to you, Tony?
The world, Chico. And everything in it.
It's a good lift.
Power can mean different things to different people. For anthropologists, power is the ability to influence the decisions and behavior of others. We may typically associate power with force, domination, and suppression. But power can also be considered productive when we think of it as the ability to create and establish the ideas, objects, and structures that influence and organize people's lives. Sometimes power is physical and tangible. Sometimes it's ineffable. Sometimes it's obvious and institutionalized. Sometimes it works subtly through everyday know-how. Anthropologists have been interested in describing and tracking power for over a century, but the way they've thought about it has evolved in relation to major historical changes around the world. This first video in our series on power will take you through a chronological review of some of the most significant anthropological ideas about power, addressing both formal politics and everyday forms of domination and resistance. It will give you a foundation for the rest of the series, which will address incarceration, the treatment of those with mental illness, disability, and other differences, state violence, surveillance, and personal empowerment and protest movements. We'll also think about power within the practice of social science, considering how some anthropologists have benefited from certain power structures and how others have fought against them.
Early anthropological studies of power were interested in how it worked in non-state societies. Colored by an evolutionary view of human society, anthropologists wanted to know how power worked in simpler societies that had existed long before large-scale, complex civilizations developed. How was power delegated or claimed? How were people able to negotiate major conflicts in the absence of a centralized authority? And how did certain individuals or groups come to dominate others? Anthropologists found that some small societies were quite egalitarian. Power was shared, and most decisions were made through group consensus. Small societies, though without a state or formal government, delegated power and managed collective life, but they did so through belief systems, social interactions, and cultural practices. During the early 20th century, British anthropologists, who were largely working through colonial networks and studying cultures living under the control of the Britain's colonial regime, developed a theory to explain how this worked: structural functionalism.
According to structural functionalism, societies work like integrated systems. Different aspects of shared cultural life function together as a whole to meet the needs of individuals and maintain the stability of the entire society.
The thing is, functionalism itself is not so much a theory as it is a macro-oriented method of analysis, a way of looking at a society in its entirety and theorizing the role that social institutions play in maintaining social order. In other words, the inherently conservative function that things like marriage, gift exchange, or religious beliefs play in contributing to the long-term survival and stability of a society. To pick one common example, a functionalist reading of something like funerary practices, the ways that different societies dispose of their dead, wouldn't focus on cultural differences or unique religious rituals. Instead, it would look at funerals as a mechanism that prevents the breakdown of social order. For example, on some level, every society has to dispose of its dead in order to prevent the spread of disease. Or you could argue that funerals provide ritualized spaces in which people can collectively grieve, which in turn promotes healing and affirms the social importance of religious and civic institutions. Both of those readings look past cultural differences to theorize the function that funerals play in maintaining social order.
What did this have to do with power? Well, in the absence of a state or government, anthropologists found that different cultural structures determined aspects of communal life, like decision-making and resource allocation. These structures also guided other aspects of everyday behavior. One significant organizing structure that functioned to delegate authority and responsibility was kinship. The family was the first and most fundamental unit of power and control. Religion also served to guide behavior through prescriptions and prohibitions thought to come from a higher power. Religion could unify a group against outsiders. It also provided a form of social control where fear of divine punishment could persuade people to uphold community mandates and avoid harmful behaviors in the absence of a formal criminal justice system. In a structural functionalist view, beliefs about witchcraft and the fear of either being the target of witchcraft or accused of practicing witchcraft enticed people to adhere to social norms and encouraged them to peacefully resolve disputes.
Following a neo-evolutionary line of thought, mid-century anthropologist Marshall Sahlins and Elman Service came up with 4 different types of societies. Ostensibly, as cultures grew in size, they moved through these stages. Bands and tribes have non-centralized power. This means power and control over resources are dispersed between members of the society. Chiefdoms and states have centralized power, political systems in which certain individuals and institutions hold control over resources. According to this typology, the greater the population density, the more centralized power takes effect. While this typology is still used today, it has not surprisingly been criticized for being overly simplified and for downplaying historical, as opposed to broadly evolutionary, change within the cultures and societies. Also, it seemed to presuppose that the emergence of the state is inevitable with growth, but anthropologists have contested this. Pierre Clastres wrote about various band-sized native societies in the South American rainforest which, he argued, espoused laws and traditions that actually fought and sought to prevent the emergence of a state system, with Clastres considered an inherently coercive and grotesque aberration peculiar only to certain societies. Instead, he argued the alternative politics of these bands value leisure, prestige, generosity, and non-coercion, with a fundamental goal of celebrating life and rendering despotic power impossible. In the general mood of his critique, Clastres was not alone. Starting in the mid-century and into the 1970s, many anthropologists began to think about power in the state very differently, where the state was not the pinnacle of a large and well-established civilization, but a freely malevolent mechanism of control. This would reshape the trajectories and priorities in the field.
During the first half of the 20th century, anthropologists had been trying to find and study peoples who were living supposedly untouched by outside influence to gain insight into the history, diversity, and development of humankind. But this was quite ironic, considering they had largely found their field sites through the colonialist networks of power that had violently seized control in the countries where they were conducting their research, in part to provide information to colonial authorities that might help them govern more effectively. Trying to study these cultures as if they were separated from these colonial networks of power and from the fomenting movements of protest against them ultimately proved to be inaccurate and impossible. Anthropologists increasingly acknowledge that even smaller-sized societies were influenced by the states controlling their territory. At the same time, they acknowledge that their forebears had been operating with colonial privilege, and therefore their ideas about power could not be taken separately from this. The publication of a foundational text, Anthropology and the Colonial Encounter, by Saudi Arabian anthropologist Talal Assad, arguing this and more, ushered in a new era where anthropologists sought to decolonize anthropology, a project which remains ongoing.
A key concept during this watershed period was that of the subaltern, introduced by Antonio Gramsci, an Italian philosopher who drew upon folklore, religion, and popular culture to develop his ideas about power and politics. The subaltern initially referred to those colonized people whose voices have been excluded from the social and economic institutions of the colonial state. Subaltern studies, which initially focused on the Indian subcontinent, spread to become a highly influential approach towards colonial, post-colonial, and decolonial studies in history and anthropology. As anthropologist Gayavardi Spivak and others have explained, subaltern means more than simply oppressed. It connotes a space of difference, rift, and erasure, a power imbalance that silences and distorts non-Western forms of knowing and being. Living under colonial, neocolonial, and imperial power structures, the subaltern native is forced to learn the colonizer's ways of speaking and thinking. And in order to be heard or acknowledged, the subaltern must find ways to translate, adapt, and conform their native ways of being and communicating to be comprehensible and acceptable to those in power. In this way, it becomes almost impossible to hear the subaltern's true voice or to understand the true experience. Intellectual, cultural, and social domination is perpetuated beneath an illusion of inclusion.
Frantz Fanon, a scholar and psychiatrist from the French colony of Martinique who worked in Algeria, went further to document the pervasive, harmful effects of colonial subjugation on the psyches of colonized peoples.
For days it has been civil war in Algeria. So far from bringing peace, de Gaulle's visit put a spark to the powder barrel. The white settlers in Algiers and elsewhere rose almost to a man, fanatically demonstrating against de Gaulle's moderate plan of a self-governing Algerian Algeria within the French community. Now, between white men, Algerians, police and soldiers, no punches were pulled.
He described the condition as a constant state of subordination and insecurity that's deeply traumatizing. Being told that you're less than, being told your native language and culture is inferior, then being expected to emulate the culture and language of the oppressor in order to be recognized as fully human, where fully human is equated with white European, but punished or ridiculed when you attempt to do so.
Get up, you son of a dog.
I'm not the son of a dog. I'm an English gentleman. And no English gentleman would walk barefoot through your disgusting town.
Fanon came to adjust his therapeutic method to address this issue. Considering racialized cultural subjugation as a significant psychological stressor, he believed psychotherapy had to disalienate the mind by addressing structural oppression. He encouraged community building among institutionalized patients, but he emphasized that the only true solution to many psychological problems would be political. That is, decolonization, the eradication of not only colonial political structures, but the dichotomous and hierarchical thinking that perpetuates subordination. While Fanon encouraged the decolonization of the mind, he also came to understand the need for violent revolution against a repressive and dehumanizing violent state when other tactics did not work. He himself fought for Algeria's liberation. He's been described as the most influential anti-colonial thinker of his time, and his writings deeply influenced national liberation movements around the world, including the Black Power movement in the United States.
Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. We want black power. We want black power. We want black power.
As interest in the subaltern spread, the concept was applied to other groups entangled in institutionalized and structural subordination such as racism and sexism outside of just colonial realms. Groups whose agency has been denied, whose ways of knowing have been silenced and marginalized, and who have been treated as less than full persons by groups in power. Feminist anthropologists, realizing how women have been disempowered by both colonial and colonized societies, also realized how ethnography had reinstantiated this by basically leaving them out. They turned their ethnographic observation on women's experience and understanding how gendered systems of power pervaded all forms of social life. Anthropologists also sought to deconstruct power by studying up, researching those with institutional power to learn how they acquired and maintained it. As part of this, they reflected on the ways their research practices had perpetuated institutionalized power relations, the way they had been granted power as outside observers to represent other people's experience, even as those being observed were denied the power to represent themselves. Those seeking to transform ethnography became critical of the academic stance, which even when researching the subaltern natives' experience of colonialism, wanted to retain the power of authorship and authoritative explanation.
The way that you're going about your film is pretty much how they teach it in any communication studies school in a Western university. The standard Western approach to cutting a documentary film, and it's to, select people, gather people, interview them, have your question sheet, set up your camera, film, and then you go and edit it. We're still using the same models, the same practices, the same research ethics, the same understanding that the world is an open book and you can just walk into a community and take anything you want and run away with it. Whereas with our people, there's the idea of cultural accountability.
I could try to tell the story of a German film student coming to New Zealand and trying to tell a Māori story, but I don't know how to tell that story in a way that rings true to somebody that's lived it. It's not my story to tell. It belongs to someone else.
So what do you think needs to be done to empower you people, Maori people, or you as an individual to tell your story? What would it be?
Anthropologists often now sought to use participatory methods that incorporated the subject's own ideas into research goals, research design, and the final product. They started to move away from the pretense of objectivity or neutrality. Many now aim to use their research to address and redress inequality and marginalization through political engagement. Moving into the latter decades of the 20th century, as many nations around the world were shifting out of immediate post-colonial context into new conditions of statehood and contending with increased reach and accelerated rates of globalization, much research in anthropology continued on a project to uncover, understand, and counter the dark side of power, concerning itself with questions of inequality, domination, and exploitation.
What do you think of when you think of power? Do you think of anthropologists as having power or being in a position of power? Why or why not? Do you see the concept of structural functionalism being relevant to power today in any way? How about the question of the subaltern? Is this still relevant in the 21st century? How?
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more, here are some useful resources in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get your regular dose of AnthroDorphins.
And be sure to stay tuned for part 2 of this video to learn more about the theories of power that anthropologists used in the late 20th century.